BMW just woke up, and the Himalayan is in serious trouble. Not because the Himalayan failed, and not because riders suddenly changed their minds, but because BMW finally decided to build a lightweight adventure bike without excuses. The F450GS isn't chasing hype or spec sheet bragging rights. It's built around balance, control, and execution, the things that actually matter when the road ends. For years, the Himalayan survived by being familiar, affordable, and good enough. But once a bike shows up that does the same job with less weight, better refinement, and real components, those old justifications collapse fast. Stick with me till the end, because this isn't about brands. It's about why expectations just moved and why they're not moving back. The comforting assumption. Stability in the middleweight adventure space did not come from dominance or innovation. It came from lowered expectations that quietly settled into place. Over time, buyers began to accept that simple and affordable meant limited, and limited meant finished. The category stopped being a proving ground and became a holding pattern. When nothing new is expected, nothing new is demanded, and the market learns to relax. That relaxation shaped purchasing behavior. Riders looked for reliability, availability, and a familiar formula that promised fewer surprises. Performance ceilings were assumed, not questioned. Features that once felt like compromises became reframed as virtues. Weight, power, and refinement were no longer points of pressure. They were treated as fixed realities of the class, and that belief spread without resistance. Predictability has a way of masking weakness. When products behave exactly as expected, shortcomings blend into routine. Buyers stop comparing upward and start comparing sideways. The segment felt solved because nobody was trying to solve it anymore. Stability became a story people told themselves, reinforced by steady sales and unchanged designs, even as the underlying assumptions went untested. Industry conversations stayed quiet. Reviews repeated familiar language, and buyers rarely challenged the narrative. Silence became consensus, and consensus became comfort, allowing the segment to drift without scrutiny while appearing healthy from a distance. Stability felt earned because nothing challenged it. Sales numbers stayed consistent. Reviews echoed familiar language, and buyers repeated the same reasoning year after year. When a category stops surprising people, it stops inviting scrutiny. That lack of scrutiny becomes protection, not through strength, but through routine acceptance. Comfort grows quietly when no alternative forces reconsideration or demands proof. That sense of calm only lasts until someone decides the ceiling was never real. How the Himalayan became the default. The Himalayan became the default by avoiding extremes. It was neither the fastest nor the lightest, neither the most advanced nor the most basic. That middle ground was not accidental. It made the bike approachable in markets where hesitation kills sales and familiarity closes deals. Accessibility worked as a strategy because it removed friction. Pricing stayed within reach. Maintenance felt manageable, and the learning curve looked forgiving. Nothing about the experience demanded justification. Ownership did not require a defense. That ease built trust, without asking riders to rethink what an adventure motorcycle should be. Over time, good enough hardened into expectation. Riders recommended the bike because it rarely offended. Dealers leaned on consistency rather than excitement. Reviews repeated the same compliments year after year, until they sounded less like evaluation and more like routine. Loyalty formed not through passion, but through the absence of pressure to change. That positioning also shaped expectations across the segment. Competing models were measured against approachability, not ambition. Innovation slowed because the benchmark was comfort, not advancement. As long as buyers kept choosing familiarity, there was little incentive for anyone to disrupt a formula that appeared to work. The result was a shared assumption that the category had settled permanently, even though no formal limits had ever been tested or enforced by technology, regulation, or rider capability alone together. Default status forms when resistance disappears. Over time, availability and familiarity replace excitement as decision drivers. The absence of controversy becomes reassurance. When buyers stop questioning options, the most accessible choice hardens into the standard. This process rarely feels intentional, but it produces loyalty through repetition rather than persuasion, reinforcing habits without requiring innovation or renewed justification from manufacturers. When standards rise quietly, defaults become exposed. If this breakdown is adding clarity, support the channel by liking this video and subscribing for deeper coverage. Share your perspective below and add your experience to the discussion. When riders stopped asking for bigger. The shift away from bigger adventure motorcycles did not arrive with announcements or slogans. It happened quietly in showrooms and garages, where buyers reconsidered what they actually used. Long travel and towering presence lost relevance when control and recovery mattered more than appearance. Buying behavior changed in small ways. Test rides grew shorter. Questions focused on balance, reach, and fatigue rather than maximum output. Riders began prioritizing how a bike behaved at low speeds, on uneven ground, and after long hours. These preferences rarely made headlines, but they guided decisions. As weight, balance, and control replaced size as priorities, the segment's center moved. Manageability became the unspoken standard. Bikes that felt easier to live with earned repeat attention, while those that demanded constant accommodation quietly lost favor. The transition did not need publicity because it aligned with lived experience. This adjustment also influenced how categories were discussed. Conversations shifted from aspiration to practicality. Riders compared notes about real conditions rather than ideal scenarios. The absence of spectacle did not mean the absence of intent. It meant decisions were being made privately without the need for validation. Without press releases or campaigns, the market corrected itself through countless individual choices that collectively redirected demand, revealing priorities that had been present for years, but rarely acknowledged openly by riders making decisions quietly without outside influence or approval. Changes in demand often surface as preferences rather than declarations. Riders adjusted expectations based on use, not trends. Parking lot conversations replaced spec debates. The shift toward control over presence reflected accumulated experience rather than fashion. Without headlines or campaigns, priorities moved organically, reshaping the segment through quiet consensus instead of public argument or visible disruption. By the way, I've got my go-to gear and accessories linked in the description if you want to check them out. Now here's where the Himalayan gets exposed. The myth breaks. Stability is often mistaken for strength, but in this segment, it functioned as an opening. When expectations remain static, any movement stands out. The middleweight adventure category had not been fortified by progress. It had been padded by routine, leaving space for disruption. The conditions were set long before any new model appeared. Buyers had adjusted their standards downward. Competitors had slowed their pace, and the conversation had gone quiet. Complacency does not announce itself. It reveals itself when someone challenges assumptions that were never defended. This is where the final comparison belongs. The Himalayan's role as a default only mattered because it defined the baseline. Once that baseline stopped rising, it became vulnerable to reinterpretation. The issue was not failure, but exposure. Stability created the opening, and opportunity rushed in. Being ready to be challenged is different from being prepared to respond. The segment's calm encouraged observers to mistake repetition for resilience. In reality, repetition dulls awareness. When nothing changes, attention fades, and faded attention invites interruption. That dynamic does not require malice or incompetence. It requires only time and comfort. Those conditions had been present for years, quietly accumulating, making the category appear settled, while actually remaining undefended against a disciplined challenge built on execution, rather than novelty waiting patiently for someone willing to test its limits, without asking permission or approval first. An opening forms when assumptions go untested. Comfort encourages stagnation, and stagnation invites challenge. The segment appeared settled only because no one had forced a reassessment. Once that pressure arrived, the difference between stability and complacency became obvious. What looked secure was merely unexamined, waiting for a standard that refused to accept inherited limits. Once the myth breaks, only execution matters. Engine design as philosophy. This engine was not shaped around peak figures or headline comparisons. Its layout reflects a preference for predictable response over dramatic output. Power delivery is tuned to arrive where control is useful, not where charts look impressive. The focus stays on how the engine behaves through the middle of the range, where traction and balance matter most, rather than chasing extremes that rarely translate into usable progress. Unconventional design choices point to those priorities. Firing order, internal balance, and torque spread are treated as tools for consistency, not personality. The goal is to reduce surprise, not add character. By shaping response rather than maximizing numbers, the engine becomes a stabilizing element. Control becomes the defining objective, and everything else is subordinated to that requirement. Behavior-focused design resists exaggeration. When engineers prioritize response over display, they remove incentives for excess. Every decision narrows uncertainty and sharpens predictability. This approach produces machines that feel composed under varied conditions, because they are not optimized for rare extremes. Control emerges from consistency, built through restraint rather than spectacle or numerical ambition. An engine built this way cannot exist in isolation, because behavior depends on what carries it. The frame tells the truth. Chassis design answers a question before a rider ever moves. Proportions, stance, and geometry communicate intent without explanation. A slim profile signals that mass was managed deliberately. Geometry favors balance over spectacle, suggesting that predictability was valued more than presence. These choices identify the type of use expected, regardless of branding or positioning. Recoverability matters more than appearance in this context. A bike meant to be corrected mid-movement needs forgiveness built into its structure. The frame supports that by avoiding unnecessary bulk and resisting the temptation to overbuild for visual reassurance. Strength is applied where it contributes to control, not where it inflates perception. What was left out is as revealing as what was included. Excess material, ornamental reinforcement, and dramatic proportions were intentionally avoided. That restraint keeps behavior neutral and feedback clear, ensuring the structure does not fight the rider. Structure alone, however, only succeeds if the surrounding systems respect the same priorities. Structural intent becomes clear when design avoids unnecessary reinforcement. Slimness is not fragility when mass is placed deliberately. Geometry communicates expectations about correction and balance without explanation. By resisting visual excess, the structure preserves neutrality. This restraint allows the chassis to support varied input without amplifying mistakes, favoring recoverability over intimidation or exaggerated presence. Structure only works if the rest of the bike does not undermine it. Components. BMW wouldn't cheapen. Certain systems determine whether intent survives real use. Suspension and braking sit at the center of that test. Here, choices reflect commitment rather than compromise. Adjustability and damping quality indicate an expectation of varied conditions, not a reliance on preset assumptions. The components are specified to maintain consistency across different surfaces, reinforcing the engine and frame philosophy. Braking decisions show restraint. Hardware is selected to deliver clear feedback and predictable modulation, not dramatic stopping figures. Control under load takes precedence over excess capacity. This approach avoids overwhelming the chassis while preserving confidence when traction changes unexpectedly. Cost cutting often appears in these areas because they are difficult to evaluate at a glance. In this case, those shortcuts were avoided. The systems that most directly influence behavior were protected, ensuring that the design intent remains intact beyond initial impressions. That consistency only holds if the platform can adapt without losing coherence. Component integrity determines whether philosophy survives use. Suspension and braking reveal priorities because they govern interaction with uncertainty. Protecting these systems preserves consistency under load and variation. When shortcuts are avoided here, behavior remains aligned with intent. The result is confidence earned through predictability, not force, allowing the platform to perform without demanding constant compensation. All of this only works if the platform stays flexible. Planning beyond. One version. This machine was conceived as a foundation rather than a single expression. Wheel strategy illustrates that foresight. By accommodating different configurations without altering core geometry, the design anticipates varied use cases while maintaining structural integrity. Adaptability is built into the platform rather than added later through revision. Adaptability matters because extremes narrow relevance. A platform that supports multiple roles avoids fragmenting the lineup and preserves familiarity. Changes occur at the edges, not the core. That approach keeps behavior consistent while allowing adjustment for different preferences. Designing this way reduces redundancy. One base supports multiple outcomes, limiting the need for parallel development. It also signals confidence in the underlying architecture because flexibility depends on balance rather than specialization. The result is a platform prepared for use rather than display, with choices aligned around longevity and coherence rather than novelty. Designing for flexibility requires confidence in fundamentals. A platform that supports variation without alteration signals balance at its core. By anticipating adaptation, redundancy is reduced and coherence maintained. This strategy favors longevity over novelty, ensuring that changes occur around a stable center. Such planning resists fragmentation, keeping the experience familiar across configurations. Hardware decisions only matter once ownership enters the picture. Capability without theater. This design rewards involvement rather than appearance, and that distinction shapes how decisions are made over time. Standing ergonomics act as a quiet filter, favoring riders who engage actively with the machine instead of posing beside it. The posture invites balance, movement, and correction, not comfort through passivity or static riding habits. Nothing about the layout chases casual approval or visual drama, and that absence is intentional rather than accidental. Skill becomes the differentiator because the bike responds most clearly when input is deliberate and informed. Riders who value feedback notice quickly, while those seeking spectacle move on without complaint or friction. The result is a subtle sorting process that happens without messaging, marketing, or explanation. Capability is demonstrated through use, not presentation, and that reality resonates with buyers who measure satisfaction by control, confidence, and precision rather than attention, validation, or image over long ownership and varied riding conditions. Involvement reveals itself through response. When posture encourages movement, engagement becomes necessary rather than optional. This dynamic filters interest without exclusion, because it neither advertises nor apologizes. Riders who value interaction recognize the intent immediately. Those seeking presentation over participation self-select elsewhere, leaving capability to define, relevance quietly through use. Confidence, however, does not come from posture alone. Technology that reduces hesitation. Electronics here exist to support decisions, not replace them, and that distinction directly affects trust over time. Interface familiarity matters because hesitation often comes from uncertainty, not difficulty or complexity. When systems behave consistently, riders stop thinking about menus, settings, or modes, and focus instead on conditions unfolding ahead. Predictability becomes more valuable than novelty because novelty introduces doubt at precisely the wrong moment. Technology that stays out of the spotlight earns acceptance by being reliable rather than impressive or distracting. Controls fade into routine, and routine steadily builds confidence through repetition. This approach avoids overwhelming the rider with options that demand constant evaluation or second-guessing. Instead, it reinforces a sense of partnership between input and response, where decisions feel supported rather than questioned. Over time, that partnership becomes invisible, which is the goal. When technology disappears from conscious thought, trust has already been established, allowing attention to remain on judgment, timing, and control rather than systems. Supportive technology earns trust by disappearing. Familiar interfaces reduce cognitive load, allowing attention to remain on conditions. Predictable behavior minimizes second-guessing, which matters more than expanded options. When systems behave consistently, confidence grows through repetition. The absence of novelty becomes a feature, reinforcing reliability and reinforcing the partnership between rider input and machine response. Trust grows when technology behaves as expected, but belief does not form from features alone. Why confidence still sells bikes. Purchase decisions follow belief rather than spreadsheets, especially when long-term ownership is considered seriously. Reputation influences risk tolerance because it shapes expectations long before problems ever appear. When things go wrong, support networks matter more than specifications, and buyers account for that quietly during evaluation. The cost of uncertainty is measured in inconvenience, delays, and frustration, not money alone. Confidence reduces perceived risk, making decisions feel safer even when alternatives clearly exist. That sense of security often outweighs incremental advantages offered elsewhere on paper. Buyers do not always articulate this process, but it guides behavior consistently across segments and years. Trust built over time becomes a form of currency, exchanged for patience, forgiveness, and loyalty during ownership. When belief is strong, hesitation fades, and commitment feels reasonable rather than risky. Even as options expand and comparisons grow louder in modern markets shaped by experience and shared stories over time. Belief forms through accumulated experience rather than comparison. Tables. Reputation influences how risk is perceived before ownership begins. Support matters when assumptions fail, shaping tolerance for uncertainty. Buyers weigh inconvenience alongside cost, often subconsciously. Confidence simplifies decisions by narrowing perceived outcomes, making commitment feel reasonable, even when alternatives exist or advantages appear marginal. Eventually, however, belief collides with price, and that collision forces re-evaluation. If you value clear, grounded motorcycle analysis without hype, subscribe now. New videos go deeper into market shifts, real-world ownership, and decisions that matter long-term. Staying subscribed ensures you see these breakdowns before assumptions harden and opportunities pass. When price stops being protection, narrow gaps force uncomfortable comparisons because they remove distance between alternatives that once felt safely separated. When premiums shrink, perceived value shifts rapidly, and loyalty weakens under sustained pressure. Buyers begin to reassess habits that once felt automatic, familiar, and unquestioned. Rational thinking overrides habit when differences become harder to ignore in daily use. Price stops acting as a shield and becomes a lens, focusing attention on what is actually received. This moment does not arrive dramatically or with announcement. It emerges through repeated exposure and quiet calculation over time. Individual decisions accumulate, subtly altering demand patterns without headlines. The process feels personal and isolated, but its effects extend far beyond any single purchase. What begins as reconsideration becomes movement, and movement reshapes markets slowly, persistently, and often without anyone noticing until change is already established. Price pressure sharpens evaluation. When differences narrow, habits lose insulation. Buyers reconsider long-held preferences as trade-offs become visible. Rational assessment replaces comfort, not through confrontation, but calculation. This process unfolds privately, driven by repeated exposure rather than impulse. Over time, these individual reassessments redirect demand, reshaping patterns without announcement or dramatic shifts. Individual decisions add up to something larger. The baseline just moved. Expectations rarely reset with noise. They move quietly, then refuse to return. Once a new reference point appears, competitors are forced to respond whether they acknowledge it or not. Standing still becomes expensive because comparison never pauses. What once felt adequate begins to look dated, and maintaining position requires more effort than advancing. The new minimum standard is not declared, but it is enforced through choice. Buyers adjust expectations upward without discussion, and products that fail to meet them lose relevance through indifference rather than rejection. This shift does not punish anyone directly. It simply reallocates attention. Engineering decisions that once felt optional become necessary, and development cycles shorten under pressure. The cost of inaction compounds as competitors accelerate to avoid falling behind. Change arrives without ceremony, but it remains permanent once established. The baseline does not wait for consensus. It moves, then holds. A new baseline alters development priorities across the field. Once expectations rise, maintaining relevance requires action rather than defense. Products are re-examined against updated standards, accelerating cycles and reallocating resources. Indifference becomes the penalty for delay. This change persists because it is enforced through choice, not declaration, making reversal unlikely once adopted. Manufacturers feel this adjustment eventually, but they are not the first to notice its effects. Dealers notice before anyone else. Sales floors translate theory into reality faster than statements ever could. Inventory confidence acts as an early signal, revealing which products attract interest and which begin to linger. Buyer questions change subtly, focusing less on availability and more on alternatives. When confidence shifts, hesitation appears, and hesitation slows movement. What stops moving first is not always the weakest product, but the one that no longer excites conversation. Dealers adapt quickly because space and capital are finite. They respond to patterns rather than promises. Ordering decisions become conservative, and emphasis shifts toward what converts consistently. These adjustments happen quietly, often before broader narratives catch up. Sales floors reflect behavior in real time, making them sensitive indicators of direction. When interest consolidates elsewhere, it leaves traces in traffic and turnover. Dealer behavior reflects shifting confidence before narratives adjust. Questions evolve from availability to alternatives, signaling reconsideration. Inventory decisions respond to movement patterns rather than messaging. When interest consolidates, space and capital follow. These signals accumulate quietly, revealing direction through absence as much as presence, long before explanations catch up. Culture follows behavior, and behavior leaves footprints long before explanations arrive. Adventure riding is reframing itself. The definition of serious riding is changing without debate. Skill and manageability now carry more weight than scale alone. Size no longer equals credibility, because control communicates intent more clearly than presence. Riders increasingly value how a machine responds under pressure rather than how it appears at rest. Identity adapts as experience accumulates, shifting away from spectacle toward involvement. This reframing does not reject the past. It recalibrates priorities based on use rather than image. Adventure riding becomes less about projection and more about participation. As that mindset spreads, it influences design and discussion alike. Narratives adjust to reflect practical realities, and credibility aligns with capability instead of excess. These changes occur incrementally, reinforced by shared experience rather than argument. Reframing occurs when experience overrides image. Skill-oriented evaluation favors responsiveness over scale. As participation deepens, credibility detaches from size and aligns with control. Identity adapts accordingly, emphasizing involvement rather than display. This evolution spreads through shared experience, influencing expectations without debate, as riders recalibrate seriousness through use instead of projection. That evolution leaves one final realization waiting to be acknowledged. The brutal truth. Nothing was taken away. The segment simply moved on. The Himalayan's role remains intact, acknowledged for what it delivered and when it mattered most. Replacement does not require failure, only progress emerging elsewhere. Markets evolve through accumulation, not erasure. A new direction does not invalidate the old, it completes it. That distinction removes any need for defensiveness or celebration. Change arrives through preference, not decree or disruption. The brutal truth stays quiet because it carries no accusation and no triumph. It recognizes contribution without freezing time or demanding loyalty. The category advanced because conditions aligned, not because anything collapsed or was abandoned. What follows is acceptance rather than victory, adjustment rather than loss. Riders adapt, manufacturers respond, and the landscape reshapes without drama. Progress rarely announces itself. It settles in slowly, becoming normal before anyone argues about it. By the time debate begins, movement has happened, leaving reflection as response. Progress rarely requires dismissal. Completion differs from failure. The segment advanced because preferences accumulated elsewhere, not because prior solutions collapsed. Recognizing contribution allows movement without conflict. This understanding closes the narrative without triumph. Change settles quietly, leaving continuity intact while direction shifts, affirming that evolution often arrives without noise or ceremony. The story closes without a lap of honor, because evolution rarely announces itself. That's the brutal truth. Nothing collapsed, nothing failed, expectations moved forward. And once that happens, the market doesn't wait for permission. Now I want to hear from you. If you've owned a Himalayan, does this shift change how you see it? Or would you stick with what you know? Drop your take in the comments. If this kind of straight analysis matters to you, hit like, subscribe, and stay tuned. More no-nonsense breakdowns coming.